Reverse by Black K. Cat. Chapter 60. Optative. Sasori is as blank-faced as ever when he steps out of the room, but there's less blood on him than the last time he came out, at least. Well, Kasame rumbles, leaning back against the wall across from the makeshift infirmary. She'll live, Sasori says without inflection, rinsing and drying his hands briskly. A glance back through the door, briefly resting on the sheet-covered form, and he snorts. For whatever good it will do when she wakes up and finds Pain captured. Personally, Kasame is a lot more worried about Conan charging straight at Kanaha in a headlong assault rather than turning suicidal, but he knows Sasori won't give a damn about that. Sasori doesn't give much of a damn about anything but his puppets, and he's seething over how many their enemies managed to destroy. So how soon does she wake up? A day. Possibly 2, if she received a larger dose of venom than I thought. I have no information on Orochimaru's summons, so I can't be sure. Sasori sounds entirely disinterested, but he nods to Kasame politely enough before he vanishes down the hall to the room he's claimed as his own. Kasame glances once more at Conan, paler than ever and breathing shallowly, and turns away. The makeshift vase is deathly silent, far removed from anything and hidden beneath the ground, and the shadows are thick everywhere the lights start to fade. Kasame doesn't particularly mind it. It's just a temporary bolt hole, and they'll be leaving it as soon as everyone remaining can walk. Of course, the fact that they're down to only 5 members isn't a good sign. 4 even, when Kasame stops being generous. Zetsu is still absent, furiously and so far futilely researching to find a way to repair the Gedomazo, and of the remaining members, only Sasori and Kasame are mobile. Orochimaru, their spymaster, is a traitor and captured. Pain has been taken. Kakuzu is dead. Their main base is in ruins, with every shinobi village on high alert. As things stand now, they've got very little chance of managing anything except a suicidal last sale. Of course, that's assuming they try a blatant frontal attack, and Kasame is pretty sure they've exhausted their opportunities for those. It's time to think like stealth-trained shinobi and act accordingly. Quietly, he lets himself into his own room and sets the bolt behind him, but doesn't pause, crossing to the full-length mirror on the far wall. He regards his own reflection critically for a moment, rubbing a finger over his blue skin with a huff, and then swings the mirror out like a door and slips through the opening revealed. The room behind is smaller, with barely space for a futon. Kasame steps over the edges of the mattress carefully, leaning down to check for breathing. Like Conan's, it's a bit too shallow for comfort, but when Kasame pulls back, one black eye flutters open and Nobito looks up at him wearily. So strange to think that he's already so used to the Sharingan that seeing it gone is a shock, Kasame muses, even as he offers Obito a toothy grin. There, still alive? Obito's mouth curls into a crooked smile, even as his eyes fall shut again.
Despite the Uzumaki siblings' best efforts,
he says, and it's a bare rasp in his throat, but still manages to sound wry. Kasame snorts, dropping down to sprawl against the cold stone wall, sandals almost brushing the bottom edge of the futon. He doesn't bother saying, "We need to get that seal off you as soon as possible," because they both already know it, not just for the sake of their goal either. Kasame is sure that it's only Obito's impressive endurance that's letting him exist with his chakra levels so dangerously low. Kasame has seen shinobi drained of their strength like this, but he's never seen one last more than a handful of hours without a medic. Obito's 3 days should be impossible. Then again, it's looking like a lot about Obito should be impossible. Conan's fine, he says, which is something of an exaggeration, but true enough to pass. I'll show Sasori a copy of that seal in the morning, see if he can counter it. Obito grimaces, unhappy and frustrated, and with visible effort his eye flickers open again.
we don't have time. The longer we give Kanaha, the more prepared they'll be.
Maybe it'll lull them into a false sense of security? Kisame suggests, but even he doesn't believe that bout of optimism. They don't have any spies in the village at the moment. Or rather, they do, but only Orochimaru knew them. So immediate, accurate information is too much to hope for, but word from the surrounding countryside puts most of the Kage and village heads in Kanaha right now. The Jinchuriki are probably there too, along with Uzumaki Kurama and his vast and inexplicable knowledge of Akatsuki's movements and members alike. So their element of surprise is entirely gone. Instead of lingering on false hope, Kisame chuckles, rubbing a hand over his short hair, and suggests, "We could start hiring again." That gets him a shadow of a rueful smile, but rather than grazing the suggestion with a response, Obito says,
There might be a way. If I can get to the outskirts of Konoha quickly enough and arrange a meeting,
"I'll go." It's not an offer Kasame has to consider for even a moment. As little as he likes the idea of leaving Obito vulnerable with only people who have never seen under his mask for protections, this is a path, a step towards their goal. Kasame can hardly even imagine a world without lies, but he wants it so very desperately, and Obito wants it the same way. If he has a way to win, even now. When he glances up, Obito is watching him, gaze exhausted but almost fever bright. He holds Kasame's stare for a long moment, unmoving, and then nods once, just faintly.
You'll have to deal with a traitor,
he warns, and the mere fact that he would think to do so makes Kasame grin in a way that's only about 40% bloodthirsty. "I get to kill him after we use him, right?" he asks cheerfully. Amusement mellows that knife-sharp stare for just a brief instant.
Of course.
Kasame chuckles, and if he had Sama Ada close at hand, he'd pat it fondly. "Then it's not a problem."
He's dangerous, but he can be blackmailed.
Obito hesitates, then grimaces and slowly, painfully rolls himself over before pushing halfway upright to lean back against the wall. Kasame doesn't try to help, just watches closely. But though it takes several long moments, Obito eventually slumps against the stone, breathing hard, and opens his eyes to look at Kasame.
You're going to have to move fast.
Kasame nods agreeably, already planning his route. The Nakano flows right through Konoha, and even if he avoids going into the village itself, it's too direct a route to waste. His sharks can get him there by tomorrow morning if he leaves soon. Apparently reading that on his face, Obito nods, tilting his head back, and manages a faint shadow of something that might be a smile.
Good. Now listen closely.
Enough time as a shinobi, enough sensitive missions, and memorizing information is no problem anymore. Kasame props his elbows against his knees, slouching comfortably, and if a part of him is already planning the death of the traitor he's being sent to meet, well, he said it to Obito once before, didn't he? Loyalty, once given, should never be a lie. Of all the people Kakashi expects to see at the memorial stone in the New Dawn, Kurama isn't one of them. He pauses by the 3 posts, watching, but Kurama doesn't look up if he notices him at all. The redhead is crouched in front of the stone, clawed hands dangling between his knees, and the first edges of the rising sun have turned his hair to blood. From this angle, Kakashi can just see the quiet expression on his face, the edge of old grief buried by something like peace. And even though his instincts say to leave Kurama to his moment and not intrude, he steps forward anyway. "Aren't they all alive right now?" he asks, but though it's an attempt to light the mood, it falls flat. Kurama ups, but his eyes don't waver from the blank areas of the stone, and Kakashi has to wonder just how many names he's seeing there. "That doesn't change the fact that they died," he says, and it's quieter than Kakashi expects. "I'd have thought you would figure that out." Because of his father, because of Shushina, because of Obito, and Kakashi should have. The deaths had impact, and the fact that they've now been undone changes very little. Very little, but maybe not nothing. "Your chicks aren't around?" he asks instead of lingering on the topic. That gets him a distinct roll of Kurama's eyes and a faintly near-eyed glance from beneath messy red hair. "They're not my chicks," he says grumpily, but it's a very mild sort of cranky, something that even Shisui would likely be able to breeze past without a heart attack. "And they're sleeping in. Kushina get them up late." Kakashi's not quite sure how to take that. Not quite sure how to take anything about Kurama and Kushina being close enough that they can grab each other, lean on each other, tease each other. Kushina was friendly before, but she didn't cling to people she didn't know, and Kakashi can't believe that she's changed. Kurama, too, is hardly a limpet, though Kakashi supposes the argument could be made that he attracts them, given how the children cling. Before he can say as much, Kurama sighs and rises to his feet, casting one more glance at the blank stone of the memorial. Before he can stop himself, Kakashi finds his mouth open, spilling words, and he says, "They won't die again." Slightly startled, Kurama turns to him, and the winter sunlight catches on his face. His hair, like coals banked but ready to burn, and the stubborn conviction in his eyes is very much the same. "Eventually they will," he says, holding Kakashi's gaze. "All of you do, in the end." You, rather than us. So strange to remember yet again, abrupt and faintly unnerving, that Kurama never used to be human. Could still count as something different if one looked at the situation a certain way. Kakashi doesn't quite know what to say to that, but before he can even think of a possible response, Kurama is glancing back at the stone, mouth curving and a wry smile. "But," he says, and it's slow, like he's weighing each word, "they're not going to be killed. Not this time." That's all the difference in the world, Kakashi knows. It lightens things, or maybe that's the way the wryness slides out of Kurama's face, leaving humor and warmth behind. "Naruto would laugh at me," he says, and the look in his eyes. Kakashi's seen it before, but only in passing, in the darkness of a Frost Country inn, when he said, "You're very human." And Kurama paused for a long, breathless moment before he answered, "I had a good role model. Probably the best." And then on the ship, days later, when Kakashi asked him just whose body he was wearing, when he said, "Sometimes the hardest choices to live with are the ones other people make for you." And Kurama laughed like something was cracked inside of him, rough and slightly wild. But under the grief, there was something else, and it's not buried at all right now. On display, as far as Kakashi is concerned, and it's something to admire, he thinks, and that's too weak a word, but he doesn't have another. "For what?" he asks, because it's clear they're not talking about the 6-year-old asleep in a dusty house, but a man who lost his entire world, who sacrificed himself and put all of his faith and hope in the tangle of malevolence and sentient chakra that had been his veritable prisoner for decades. Kakashi can't quite imagine what kind of person would be able to do that, but he thinks sometimes when he looks at little Naruto that he might be willing to find out. "Everything," Kurama says dryly, raking a hand through his hair to shove it out of his face, though the bright strands fall back in front of his eyes after barely a heartbeat. He glances back towards the rest of the village, towards the house and the children, and his expression is amused, but faintly bittersweet. "The brats, the way I bolted. Zabuza, you." Kakashi isn't entirely sure what's laughable about his presence in all of this, but he's willing to take Kurama's word that the Naruto from the future would find it that way. Would he survive the laughing? He asks dryly, because he's seen how Kurama reacts to being mocked, and explosively is an understatement. Kurama blinks at Kakashi like he can't understand the question, but the moment it clicks, he rolls his eyes and looks away. "Maybe," he allows grudgingly. "There wasn't exactly a lot to find funny at the end." It goes unsaid that Kurama would have made him laugh whenever it was possible. And Kakashi, how does someone teach a monster how to love? It's not something you can teach, idiot. I learned on my own and taught myself. It's finding someone who's worth learning for that's the hard part. Kakashi thinks about the Kurama he first met, barely able to interact with other people, full of heavy, dark, destructive grief. Tries to compare him to the man he sees now, brash but steady and full of warmth. He tucks his hands in his pockets, watching Kurama turn away, and the thought surfaces in his mind like someone who's drowning and finally manages to come up for air. "Could I?" remembers Kurama again, meeting Naruto for the first time. Remembers his father, old and tired but still smiling, saying, "I can't change what's already happened or what my decisions did to you." And then his face when Kakashi told him he understood why he'd chosen the way he did. For the last 12 years, Kakashi has existed by looking back, by living on regret and self-destruction only barely channeled into his work. He's mourned and regretted and lingered and Of course Kushina punched me, he thinks, and the smile that accompanies the thought is wry as he presses a hand to the bruise on his jaw. I wanted her to! Of course she resented me for leaving Naruto when I already resent myself. There's no changing what's been done, and it will always exist. Aren't they all alive right now? That doesn't change the fact that they died. Change in the present doesn't mean change in the past. Outside of time travel, as Kurama clearly shows, that's impossible. But change in the future? Moving on, moving forward, refusing to let the past drag like a stone around his neck? I can. Nothing is changing around him. Kurama is still walking away straight and steady, and the memorial still bears its heavy load of names. Kakashi doesn't feel the world shift, or the stars realign, or his memories become lighter. They'll always be there, and there's no getting rid of them, but it's just a spark. A flicker like embers finally catching the tinder, the flame leaping up for one brief moment. And maybe it isn't instant salvation. Maybe there's no such thing. It's some small bit of light, though. A dark tunnel is only a series of steps, he thinks, and it's easier with a flame to lead the way. For the first time in years, Kakashi believes he might be able to come out on the other side. Genma likes to think he's a pretty simple guy. He doesn't have any high-flying aspirations, personal vendettas, or dark secrets, and his backstory is sad but probably doesn't qualify as tragic. He's just another shinobi, talented in a handful of ways and content with where he is in life. That said, Genma also knows he tends to be a little bullheaded when certain situations make themselves known. Genma. Raido sighs, staring down at the absolute disaster that is their kitchen table. Genma makes a noise of absent acknowledgement, but doesn't look up from the stack of mission logs he's leafing through because something isn't adding up, but Genma can't actually figure out what it is. Genma, Raido repeats a little more forcefully this time. Food. In a minute. Math has admittedly never been Genma's strong suit outside of plotting trajectories, but he's pretty sure these numbers don't make sense. After the Second Shinobi War, with the way outright hostilities eased, Anmu enrollment plateaued, and the papers are dragged out of his grasp, and even though Genma grabs for them, Raido knows it far too well and intercepts his hand halfway, shoving a bowl into it instead. Eat, the big man says with clear exasperation, setting a plate of broiled mackerel down with a pointed thumb. Genma, I haven't seen you get up in almost 6 hours. What are you doing? Knowing this is an argument he's not going to win, Genma bolts down the rice as fast as he can, ignoring the narrow-eyed stare Raido is giving him for it. Mission, he says between mouthfuls. From Sarutobi-sama. Raido doesn't ask for details because he was on boot as well and knows exactly how such things work. He just frowns a little, collecting the dirty dishes that mean Genma entirely missed him eating in his distraction. Well, I'm sure the Hokage wouldn't want you neglecting to eat for days on end, he says, brushing Genma's shoulder as he passes. Gods know you need a lot of energy on Abu missions, or even just training for them. I've seen you put away a whole rack of fish in one sitting after you got back, remember? Genma drops his bowl. Fuck, he says, and then fuck as he lunges for one of the merchant manifests he'd borrowed from accounting without explicit permission. Raido dives to save the remaining mackerel, but Genma hardly notices, flipping through pages to find the list from last week. He hadn't been overly picky about the records he swiped, going for anything with Danzo's name attached, and now he blesses his foresight. He checks the list, sets it aside, and goes further back. Danzo accepted the last supply delivery to Anbu headquarters. 10 days before that, Danzo had accepted another order, and 6 days before that, and then 9 days before that. It's a pattern in that it's not a pattern. Danzo still visits the Anbu barracks every few days, overseeing training or checking on missions, and no one's ever really marked it. He's an elder of Gana'a and the Sandame's former teammate. Of course he'll assist the organization he was one of the first members of, whether that means advising on strategy or signing for deliveries of food or weapons. But sometimes those deliveries are just slightly larger than they should be. Shinobi tend to need a lot of food, after all, especially when they're training or out on missions, but the mission logs prove that the number of occupants in the barracks were always below the normal levels, not above. Right under their noses. Logical? Simple. Easy. There was a delivery just a few hours ago, Genma knows. What are the odds that it was one of the big ones? You're a genius, he tells Raido, kisses him soundly, and grabs his mask. Gen? Raido says with some amusement, watching him strap his flak jacket on, but confusion gives way to alarm when Genma heads for the sealed cabinet in the living room. Why are you getting those? Is there a war starting I don't know about? Genma rolls his eyes a little, sorting through bundles of poison senbon with practiced care. If I assassinate the Rikage, I promise to give you at least 10 minutes warning. He offers dryly, and when Raido makes a noise of abject despair, he glances up with a crooked smile. Cool it, Rai. It's the mission. I think I figured something out. Raido watches him pick 3 bundles, each marked with a different color of ribbon, and his frown doesn't abate in the slightest. Those... Genma just smiles, even as he tucks the majority into his weapons pouch and slides a few extra needles into the seams of his clothes. Better safe than sorry, he says lightly, and it's only mostly a lie. Pushing to his feet, he closes the cabinet, watching until the seal flares and locks it again, and then turns to give Raido a smile. Look, I need to go. Don't wait up. There's not even an attempt to argue, because Raido knows the job as well as Genma does. Just be careful, he says quietly, and when Genma leans in, Raido wraps him in a tight hug. For a moment, Genma lets himself linger, breathing in the warmth, but he doesn't have time. Later, Rai, he says, pushing away, and then makes for the window as he drags his mask down over his face. A hard leap carries him out and across the gap between buildings to land lightly on the next roof over, and from there, getting to Anbu headquarters is practically route. Genma doesn't bother with stealth as he drops into the tunnels because one more Anbu is hardly going to raise an eyebrow here and heads for the storage rooms. It's been a week since the last time Danzo accepted a shipment, but the next one doesn't come in for another week, and none of the gaps between Danzo's orders are longer than 12 days. It might mean nothing at all, and Genma could be jumping at shadows. But it's odd, and he doesn't like that. Anbu enrollment never fluctuates much outside of open warfare, and for incoming shipments to show variation that mission rosters and current occupation can't account for? Well, Genma doesn't like it much. He's a simple man, and unexpected variations in otherwise consistent patterns make him twitchy. The main storeroom is dark and completely silent when Genma eases through the door and locks it again behind himself. The lockpicks go back under the plate of his hitayate, and he leaps up onto the top of the shelf along the wall. The order is piled neatly in the middle of the open section of floor, waiting for the small kitchen staff to put things away. Anbu are encouraged not to leave the base while on duty in case they're called up on emergency missions, so the food's always decent enough to compensate, and the cooks know what they're doing. They're not shinobi themselves, though, and they probably never think to check for marks of other people in the room. Carefully, Genma tucks himself away in the darkest parts of the shadow where he won't be seen even if someone turns the lights on. He doesn't think they will. That would be fairly noticeable against the dark hallway. But he didn't get to be the youngest ever member of the Hokage Guard platoon by being careless. He doesn't like this. Doesn't like it at all. The thought that Danzo could be a traitor. The Hokage might not have said it outright, but Kakashi, one of the most stubbornly self-destructive people Genma has ever met, dropped out of route right before it was quietly disbanded and never gave a reason why. I think that access to 10 of the most powerful shinobi in the world, 4 of them young children, is quite a lot of temptation for a man who once trained children to be the perfect weapons. Root is supposedly over and done with, stripped of power and personnel by the Hokage's orders, but really, what else could be happening to the disappearing supplies? They aren't for the regular Anbu members because their numbers don't change enough to require the extra, so logic says the surplus food ends up elsewhere. Easy enough to find out where. All Genma needs is a little patience, and he's got that in spades. The wait gives him time to consider how to handle things if he does uncover evidence of Root being reestablished. Danzo is Sarutobi's old teammate, so Genma can't exactly toss accusations around without plenty of proof, even if the Hokage was the one who assigned him the mission in the first place. The manifests are a good start, but something heavy scrapes across stone. Instantly, Genma goes perfectly still, quieting his breathing until it's completely inaudible, His internal clock says he's been waiting for several hours already, but apparently it's paid off because a section of wall swings out like a door and two figures in dark clothes ghost in. They're alert but not weary as they lay out ceiling scrolls and start shifting part of the stack of crates into it, but Gemma doesn't allow himself to relax. There's no way of knowing what's in the tunnel beyond, but he's also not about to miss his chance to find out. Odds are there's no way to unseal it from this side since the pair left it standing open. They're distracted, though, and Genma takes the opening, crawling across the ceiling with slow, easy intent. No fast motions that could get him noticed, and even after all this time as an assassin, instinct says to bolt for cover. But Genma doesn't listen. He eases his way down the wall, sticking to the heavy shadows cast by the tall shelves, and as soon as both shinobi have their backs to him, he drops to the ground, takes a breath, and slips into the tunnel. No other shinobi are waiting, which is a relief, and one of the things Genma wasn't allowing himself to worry about. Collecting extra groceries doesn't seem like the type of thing anyone would bring backup for, but then Danzo's a paranoid bastard on a good day. The passage isn't too long, thankfully, and there aren't guards at the far end either. The cavern it opens onto is empty, bridges of stone stretching across the chasm in the center and branching off to meet other openings in the walls. Genma can't hear anyone behind him yet, but the pair in the storeroom will probably be finished shortly, and he can't linger. He picks a doorway at random, more for proximity than anything else, and pads down the worn stone hall, hearing straining to pick up any hint of voices. Several minutes in, just as he's about to turn around and pick another corridor, he catches a low, deep murmur from up ahead. Eyes narrowing behind his mask, Genma channels a touch of chakra into his hands and feet, leaping up to cling to the stone ceiling like a spider. It's high enough that there's little risk of being seen unless he moves too fast, and he crawls towards the source as quiet as he can make himself. The sound is coming from beyond the tunnel's exit, where a whisper of cold breeze carries the smell of the open forest, and when Genma leaps lightly down, his feet hit grass.
Building up your training,
a familiar man is saying, and Genma's heard Danzo more than enough times to recognize him even without seeing the man. He doesn't try to, but darts for the forest and quickly scales one of the larger trees to hide himself among the leaves. Despite his age, Danzo is too good a shinobi to miss the feeling of eyes on him. Yes, sir. That sounds like a child's voice, young and light, and Genma fingers one of the senbon in the cuff of his shirt, debating with himself. Danzo is good, but Genma only needs to score a glancing blow with this particular batch of poison. The Hokage will definitely object, but once an assassination is done, there's no way to undo it. Still, no need to jump to conclusions. Better to have all the information so he can accurately counter any attempt to undermine the mission.
Do you understand your mission?
Danzo asks, and it's not the fatherly tone he tries to take with a regular Anbu. This is something cold and hard, as unyielding as iron.
Your partner has already accepted.
A faint hitch of breath, almost inaudible, and the child says, I am to kill Shin before he can kill me?
The survivor will be assigned a very important mission for the good of the village.
Rough steps, not quite even, and identifiably Danzo's.
Report to me when you succeed.
Yes, sir. Another hitch, just enough to make the title crack faintly. There's no other movement for a long moment as Danzo reaches the passage, steps echoing on the stone, and then the sound of a sword sliding out of its sheath. I don't want to kill you, Sai. Another boy sounding a little older but also heartbroken. It's what Danzo-sama ordered. The younger boy again. There's a mission. We serve the village of Kanoha and Danzo-sama. Well, Genma takes a breath and closes his eyes, thumps the back of his head lightly against the trunk in self-directed aggravation, but you always have to be the hero, don't you, Half-Pint? His sister used to ask him as she slapped salve on his bruises. Genma would roll his eyes, but keep starting fights anyway. For himself, for Guy, for Bisu, for anyone who got picked on, and Genma's a pretty simple guy. But betray a fellow Konoha shinobi? Use your power against someone who didn't earn it? Yeah, then Genma will start to have problems. two kids killing each other in the name of someone operating behind the Hokage's back, Danzo's probably going to end up choking on all the poison Senbon Genma shoves down his throat at the next available opportunity. He opens his eyes, reaching up to pull his hair back into a stubby ponytail and secure it with a rubber band, then undoes his bandana and tucks his hitayate away. It's a clan tradition to wear it that way, and Genma isn't about to offer any hints as to his identity, just in case this goes south. Danzo's probably watching from somewhere hidden, but Genma doesn't have the time to check. He can hear the ring of blades, a soft cry, and there's no room for even a genjutsu. He leaps from his tree to the next, then over and down. One tanto skids against the bracer on his left arm, while the second clangs against the reinforced guard on the back of his right hand as he knocks it away. They're young children, he takes in as he turns to face them both. The gray-haired boy, probably 9. The younger, dark-haired one, barely 7. They're both staring at him with wide eyes, clearly startled, but Genma doesn't have a chance to reassure them. "We need to move," he says sharply, and the way they both stiffen means they know a command when they hear one. "Your mission isn't authorized?" "Danzo-sama authorized it," the older boy says. "This is the last test before we finish training." Instinct more than sound, as Genma, spinning Senbon already in hand and the masked shinobi aiming a kunai at his throat, stumbles past him instead. Genma doesn't waste time on regrets or hesitation. He flips a Senbon through his fingers and stabs it down hard in the back of the attacker's neck, and the man crumples. The other 2 root members appearing out of the trees don't give their fellow shinobi so much as a glance. "No," Genma thinks, palming another 5 Senbon. 3 that will paralyze, 2 that will kill, and Genma doesn't want to kill shinobi who might as well be comrades, but there are 2 little kids behind him who were ordered to kill each other, and Genma isn't about to let them do it. "You come with me, and you both get to live," he tells the boys, though he doesn't look away from the advancing shinobi. Danzo likely won't be far behind, but his presence will drop Genma's chances of getting out of this from poor down to abysmal. The younger one makes a sound quiet but desperate and says, "Shin?" The root members move, and Genma dives for the woman even as he hurls 3 of his needles towards the man. She swings her tanto at him, almost too fast to dodge, but Genma's been sparring with Raido, an even better swordsman, since they were Genin, and rolls beneath the blow. He comes up hard, with his shoulder leading, catching her in the stomach, and the force is enough to throw her back, even as her sword scores a deep line across the top of his shoulders. A kunai stabs down at Genma's head as he twists to his feet, ignoring the burn of torn skin, but he knocks it aside with his arm guard and slams a Senbon tipped with paralysis mixture into the muscle of the man's thigh. The woman is already back on her feet and lunging, but Genma leaps clear of her, last Senbon in the air, even as he lands in front of the kids and she hits the ground hard, already convulsing. "Coming?" he asks the boys, carefully lighthearted, and they trade glances even as a flare of chakra announces someone activating a jutsu. Genma flies through the familiar hand seals, then slams his palm down, and the earth shakes as a wall of stone rises. "I'm not going to kill you, Sai," the older boy says and grabs the younger's hand. He manages a smile, though it wavers a little, and adds, "You still haven't finished that picture you were drawing me, right?" Apparently that's all he needs to say. Sai curls his fingers around shins and nods, and if Genma had time for a sigh of relief, he'd take it. "Come on," he says instead, and grabs both boys. In the same moment, a second flare of fire strikes the Doton wall, making it tremble, and Genma curses. No way to counter, but the wall shatters with a deafening crack, but when Danzo steps through, the only thing remaining is a whirl of leaves that's already dispersing.